then we will. Cool, there we go. So Jamie, to start with, can you share your screen and show us the 5 reports that you can find on Google Analytics 4, and just talk through them a little bit, tell people what they'll see and find in these reports?
Sure. Yeah, sorry about the slight delay there, everyone. I'm having some internet issues in the office this morning, but it should all be fine now. Yeah, so like Maddie said, I'll quickly run through like what the main sections of GA4 are first of all. So when you first log into GA4, this is the main screen that you'll see. This is just kind of like a broad overview of the past week or so, and kind of how many people have visited your site in the last 30 minutes or so. But the main sections we want to go into and look at is within the reports section here on the sidebar. So again, you get another little snapshot here when you first visit it, which just kind of gives you a broad overview of what's going on your site. I don't personally use this bit that much because it doesn't go into that much detail. Second part is what's called the real-time overview, and this is how many people are basically on your site at the moment. So this can be quite useful if you have a very highly trafficked site. So you can almost see in real time like what everybody's doing on the site right now. Some larger sites like to do this to kind of figure out like how many staff they should have on the phones right now and things like that. But yeah, for most people, it's not massively useful. So the main sections you'll look at, the one I spend most time in personally is the acquisition section. And I normally look at these two here, which are user acquisition and traffic acquisition. So the main difference between them is that the user acquisition report focuses on individual users. So that's basically individual people who've came and visited your site. And that's what the report focuses on. Whereas traffic acquisition is a very similar report. It looks exactly the same. I'm not sure why it's not showing any data there right now, but it's probably a bug. But in this section of the report, it shows you sessions. And generally what you'll see is, you know, an individual user might have multiple sessions. They might visit your website several times before they convert or something like that. Or, you know, if they're a regular customer, they might visit your site all the time. So what you'll see here is the number of sessions tends to be significantly higher than the number of users, which is what we see here. We've got 1,105 sessions to 651 users, which shows that, you know, there's quite a lot of people that are coming back multiple times to the site. So the next section, and well, in this report, you can drill down into a lot more detail as well. So you can see the individual channels people came from. So like organic search, where it's somewhere like Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, search engines like that. Direct traffic, meaning people who typed in the URL directly on your to access your website. Organic social, meaning, you know, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. You also can get referrals, which are basically links from other websites.
Jamie, with organic social, can you split it down further into specific social media platforms? So how many came from LinkedIn, how many came from Facebook, or is it just social as a whole?
Yeah, so if you go into here where it says first default channel group, what this does is allows you to kind of change what you're seeing there. So if you go to source/medium, it would normally drill in and give you a bit more detail. Maybe I should expand the date range here a bit, so it might give us a little bit more information. Yeah, so here we can see that all of the social visits were coming from LinkedIn, because it says linkedin.com/referral. because social traffic will be counted as a referral, because it is essentially a referral from another site, but Google groups them together as organic social for ones for like big social networks that they recognize. Smaller social networks that not many people visit might not get counted as organic social, but the big ones, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and ones like that would fit into organic social.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
So in this section, you can also see how many conversions have come from each channel. So if you scroll over, you can see event count and conversions here. And through that, you can, if you click where it says all events, you can actually see, you can drill down into seeing how many events came through from each channel. So let's say you've got this new campaign going where you've advertised in a magazine or something, and you want to see how many conversions you got from people who came from that magazine. You would find that magazine in the referral in this section here, because let's say you were getting a lot of visitors from a magazine, and you had it set up with Google's campaign URL builder, which allows you to kind of link. Let's say you had a link in the magazine to that had the correct parameters in from Google's URL builder. You would then see the source in this section, and then you could drill down and see how many phone calls you got and things like that from it. So the next bit is engagement. So again, I don't really use the overview that much. I mainly stick to the individual reports. So events are any events on your site. So one thing to remember with one of the key differences between the old version of Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, and Google Analytics 4 is in Google Analytics 4, everything is an event. So you'll see a lot of things here which you may not be remotely interested in. So page view, that's an event. Anytime someone looks at a page on your website, that gets counted as an event. You've got scroll events where people scrolling up and down your site. You've got click events, which could be someone clicking on a link or on an image to make it bigger or something like that. So not all of these are particularly useful for everyone, which leads me on to the conversion section, which has anything on your web, any events that you've set up on your website that you would count as a conversion. So that might be an inquiry form fill, that might be phone calls if you have some kind of call tracking set up on your website. It could be clicks to social media icons on your website. There can be lots of different things that you count as conversions. And so these would show up here. So we've got a few here: marketing support, lead generation. These are just a couple we've got on here. And the way you can, so any conversion needs to be manually labeled as a conversion, first of all, because otherwise it will just be classed as an event. And while you can just look in the events section, you've got all the other events in there as well, which makes it not quite as useful. So if you wanted an event that you've set up to be tracked as a conversion, it's quite easy to do. You just go into the admin section, click on events, and you'll see all of the events that have triggered recently on your website. And all you have to do is click that toggle switch to mark it as a conversion, and then from now on it'll be counted as a conversion, though it's not retroactive, so it will only be counted as a conversion from now on.
That's really helpful to know. Thank you, Jamie.
So back to the engagement section. So pages and screens is a good place to look if you just want to know how many views a particular page has had. If you're not particularly concerned about where those views came from, or a lot more detail on them. You just want to know what are our most popular pages on the site, and this is the place to find that out. And so it's ordered by the number of views, so all of the most popular pages will be at the top.
Jamie, with that screen there, somebody said they used to be able to view a weekly and monthly view on the graph, but for some things they can only seem to see daily stats on a graph. Is there a way to change what that's showing to make it show on other graphs as well, or is it just an automated thing?
If someone knows anyway, I'd like to know. I've been trying to figure it out for quite a long time, and from what I can tell, there doesn't in the old version of Google Analytics, you could change it so you could so each point on the graph would be like a week or a month or a year. So you could really drill down, and it was very useful to be able to see it like that. But annoyingly, I haven't found a way to do that yet. Maybe there's some hidden option somewhere, but I haven't found it, and I've spent quite a lot of time in this.
Okay, I understand.
I think if you want to view data that way, the way forward is to use something like Google Looker Studio to create a custom dashboard for yourself, where it kind of shows up where the data is presented in exactly the way that you want. As a quick example, I'll see if I can find our template we've got here. Yeah. So we've created some dashboards for all of our clients who have websites with us. So some of you might have seen these already, because they started going out at the beginning of August. And so this is Google Looker Studio, and it just allows you to kind of present the data from GA4 in a way that works for you. It's a bit complicated to set up. I mean, we can, if anyone wants help setting up with one of these reports that has custom information on it, we can help with that. But yeah, it just allows you to present it in a way that works better for you. You can, I mean, I'm not going to actually make the changes now, because this is our template, and I don't want to break anything. But you can go and you can change. You could, like this dimension here, I could change that to month of year, and then expand the date range, and it would show me each month rather than the individual days. So at the moment, it looks like that's the only way to do it. Hopefully Google will improve GA4. They've made lots of improvements over the last few years since I started using it. But yeah, for now, it doesn't look like it.
Okay, we'll send the link to Looker Studio in our follow-up email then, if people do want to have a go at trying to sort that out for themselves.
Okay, where were we? Oh yeah, so next section is landing page. So one thing to remember with landing page, so this is very similar to the old landing pages report in Universal Analytics, in that it shows you landing page being the first page that someone visits on a website. Looks like there's some kind of bug here, and it's not showing all of our pages. I have no idea why, so I'm going to have a look into that later. GA4 can be buggy quite often.
What does the not set mean, or is that just the bug? Would that not normally show there?
So this is another thing I was going to go into in a minute. So one of the things with landing pages is when GA4 was first created, there was no way to look at landing pages. It was a feature that was added later on, which is probably why we might be seeing this bug here. So because we've set up hundreds of GA4 accounts, one of the things we noticed is there doesn't appear to be any, like the landing page does not appear to have been recorded before. I think it's sometime in October 2022. So if you're trying to compare landing page data to previous year, you won't be able to see that data until sometime in October this year. So yeah, that's quite annoying because we're missing a whole bunch of data on landing pages because they just didn't add it in until last October, which is very annoying.
Okay, thank you.
So the monetization section, this is probably something most law firms won't really use much. I've pretty much never used it because it's mainly built around e-commerce. So maybe you would use it if you're selling something like I don't know if you sell any particular services actually through your website that someone purchases using their credit card on your website. I know there's a few people we work with that sell things like books through their websites. So if you do something like that, this is something that would be useful because it allows you to track how much revenue you've made through it. But for most law firms, it's not something you need to really look at very often.
Great. And before we move on, Jamie, next to landing page at the top, there's the triangle with an exclamation mark, I think, in it, the red triangle.
Yes.
Can you tell people what that means, please?
So this is called thresholding, and the reasoning behind it is that Google says they're protecting people's privacy. Personally, I don't really believe that because they've never really cared about people's privacy much before. But that's the reasoning behind it. I think it's more Google trying to not fall foul of like GDPR regulations. So generally, where you see this, it means that Google thinks that you might be able to get some personal data from this information. I personally haven't seen it happen before because GA4 anonymizes IP addresses and things like that. But they think that where there's basically an algorithm that figures it out, and where they think the GA might leak some personal information, they apply this and you don't get the full information.
So what information are you missing that you would normally have?
Oftentimes it's usually information like, the main thing I see on is conversions. I find conversion data is quite often hidden because I guess that means that maybe you could link it to a specific form. So you like if the date range is narrow enough, and you set that, let's say on a particular day, let's say yesterday you had one form fill on your website, just one form fill, and then but you also only had one visitor to your website. So that means that you could link that visitor directly to that form fill, which might be a breach of GDPR in some way. So that's kind of an extreme example because very few people are going to have just one visitor and one form fill in a day, but that's kind of what it's to do with. And it's also about like the demographic data that Google records as well, so that you can link that. Now there are some ways around it. One of them is to just increase the date range. So especially if your website doesn't get many visits, the larger the date range, the less likely you are to be subject to thresholding because it's less likely that a particular session on your website could be linked to an individual. If you're a website that gets loads and loads of visitors, you won't need to use as big a date range. Whereas if you get very few visitors, the larger the date range, the better, really. There is another option, and that's basically changing the reporting type. And if you go into the admin section, I haven't done this in a little while, so data settings. Oh no, here reporting identity. What you can do . They seem to have actually got rid of it here. Sometimes there's, I guess it's not, maybe they're trying to get rid of it or something, but sometimes on other ones I've looked at, there's an option here to only use information from the device. Because Google Signals, what that is kind of Google's cookieless way of getting like demographic data and things like that. So there's an option to use a reporting model that that doesn't use Google Signals. I'm not sure why it's missing here. I last used this about a month ago, so it's possible they've gotten rid of it, or it's possible it's just not enabled on our GA4 account. But if you see that device only one that doesn't use Google Signals, that will often get rid of thresholding.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for the main report overview.
Yeah, shall we maybe move on to some of the differences between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4? So any things that were on Universal Analytics that are no longer available, things that have maybe changed wording or changed place to find them?
Yeah, so the way to think of the difference between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4 is that it isn't an upgrade as such. It's an entirely different version built from the ground up. So Universal Analytics was built primarily for the web. It was built as an analytics software for the web, and it was built around websites. Whereas with Google Analytics 4, it was built originally for apps. It was based on Google's app analytics, like mobile phone app analytics platform called Firebase. So Google Analytics 4 is actually originally built around analytics for mobile phone apps, which is why it works very, very differently. And that's why everything is an event, because on mobile phones, when you're using an app, you don't have web pages for the app, you have screens, which is why here you see pages and screens, because a mobile phone app wouldn't have pages. So because of that, that's why you can't transfer all your old data over to Google Analytics 4, and why it just works very, very differently. So the main thing being everything is an event. Whatever you do on the website, there's not really a such thing as a page view. A page view is just another event. But that does give you a lot more information in how users interact with the website. So before, on the old version of Google Analytics, if you wanted to track, say, how far someone scrolled down a page on your website, what they clicked on, that you would need to add a lot more code to track that information. But now a lot of these things are just built into Google Analytics right from the beginning. So things like tracking file downloads of things like PDF files you have on your website, how far people scroll, click events, all of that is just tracked by default. You still need to set up some events yourself, like if you're tracking inquiry form fills, things like that, they still require custom events, but a lot more is tracked by default. There's also one of the other big differences, one of the things that people tend to notice quite often is they ask, where is the bounce rate? I want to track what the bounce rate is from my website. And then the answer to that is that bounce rate is no longer a metric, it's gone. What you'll see instead is, if I just go into one of the reports. It's not showing. I swear I always run into problems with GA4 when I'm doing a webinar. Now it's showing some data, okay. So what you see here is engaged sessions and engagement rate. So this is the new version of bounce rate, basically, but it works a little bit differently. So the main difference between the bounce rate and engaged sessions is on bounce rate, all it did was track did a user come onto this page and then either leave or visit another page or carry out an action. So what that meant is it just wasn't a useful metric for a lot of websites unless your kind of like business model is trying to get people to visit as many pages on your site as possible, like if you're a news website or something like that. Whereas for how a lot of people interact with, like law firm websites, people might find your website by a blog. Sorry, I'm having a file. Just wait a second there. So people might find your website by a blog, have a quick look at the blog, and then pick up the phone and call you. But then they leave the website. That would be counted as a bounce, even though what they did was a good thing. They picked up the phone and called you. That's what you want. So that's why bounce rate has been gotten rid of now and it's been changed to engaged sessions. It tracks a bunch of different things. Part of it is the amount of time they spend on your website, whether they take any actions on your website, like click something, send an inquiry form fill, how far they scroll down content. All of these things mean an engaged session. Whereas if they just kind of came onto your site, stayed for about 10 seconds because they didn't think the content was right and then left, that would not be counted as an engaged session. So generally, it's a better metric overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I used to hate bounce rate because ours was quite high on some pages, and it was very frustrating because if it was a blog post, we only wanted them to read the blog post, really.
That's it, yeah. And with quite a lot of SEO campaigns, we would write blogs for clients, which would increase the traffic, and then the bounce rate would end up increasing because people are more likely to bounce from a blog than they are a service page. So yeah, you could only really use bounce rate in isolation. It just wasn't a good metric for a lot of websites. And yeah, the engagement rate is much more useful.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other questions we were asked around the difference between GA4 and Universal Analytics was data modeling and reporting. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so in terms of like modeling how conversions work, in Universal Analytics, there were a lot more options. You had things like first click, time decay, a whole bunch of different things you could use to model how you would attribute conversions. Whereas in GA4, last time I checked, there were only two different ways you could do it. I think it's either last click or their own data-driven model. And so their data-driven model is supposed to be a lot better than using any of the other ones because it takes into account a whole bunch of different things other than just whether someone clicked first or last or something like that. So it kind of gives you a better overview of where your conversions are coming from than it did before. Okay,
brilliant. Hopefully that answers that person's question and we can go into some more detail if they need us to. So maybe let's go into conversions. So how do people record conversions, and can you see which pages created the most conversions, or is that not possible now? It's, page views are considered an event rather than just a page view.
It can be harder to track some conversions than others. So there are some limitations with GA4 that we didn't have with Universal Analytics. So as an example, a lot of our clients use Ruler Analytics to track their phone calls. And in GA4, it was possible to see the landing pages for like, how many people who landed on this page ended up making a phone call. But with how Google Analytics works now, that's no longer possible. You can see it down to like this many people from organic search converted, this many people from direct converted, but you can't see it to that page level as easily as you used to. And that's just some limitations of Google Analytics, Google GA4's API, and because they're basically a lot more strict on how the outside world can interact with Google Analytics, because there used to be a huge amount of spam in Google Analytics. I mean, if you've used the old version of Google Analytics for long enough, you'll probably remember things like referral spam, and it used to be a huge problem. And we used to have to have all sorts of filters set up to exclude it. And that's not as easy for spammers anymore, because it's GA4 is a lot more locked down, but at the same time, you can't get as much data into it or out of it, which is quite annoying.
So if you were somebody that relied upon that data to sort of prove your ROI, what would you suggest people measure instead, or how do people get around that and make it into some sort of way that shows the results that they've got?
Well, you can still see the ROI through just looking at, you know, what the overall conversion rate is. Has it increased? Has it decreased? And looking at the specific channels as well. One things you can do. One thing we're looking at for our inquiry form fields, because at the moment they will basically, the only way to track them is all of our inquiry form fields go to a specific landing page, which is something like /thank you or something like that. And so that means that all of the inquiry form fields show as completing on that page, but people do want to know, well, I want to know how many people completed the form on my divorce page or my wills page or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we're looking at doing is basically passing certain parameters through to GA4, which then get turned into what are called, I'm probably going into a bit advanced here, but what are called custom dimensions. And then you can use that to kind of group by the pages that people converted on, which would be the page they went to before completing the inquiry form fill. So yeah, it can be done. It's just like a lot of things in GA4, it's just a lot more complicated than it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to discuss these things anyway, even though it is quite complex, just so people know that it can be done. And if they are struggling to do it themselves, you know, an SEO person is probably their next point of call to get it set up. Yeah,
I mean, there are a lot of things that we can do by doing kind of like customized things that that you can't just automatically roll out to everybody, because everybody's website works in slightly different ways. So oftentimes there is, in GA4, there is often like a bit of like a hacky way of doing things that's kind of, you can't just do out of the box, but you can normally figure something out. So yeah, if you're trying to get some kind of data from GA4, just ask and we might be able to find a way to do it.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a few other questions that are just around sort of traffic sources and how to set up an audience, but is there anything else you want to cover before we move on to those questions? Any other differences between UA and GA4 you think are worth highlighting?
I'd say those are, we've kind of covered the main things off, but I did write a blog post on the differences between UA and GA4. So if anyone wants a bit more information on that, recommend reading the blog post. I go into more detail on it there.
Yeah, I'll link that in the follow-up email as well with the recording attached, so you can go and have a look at it from there. Okay, so let's move on to our next question then, which is how do I compare different traffic sources?
So the main way to do a comparison in GA4 is up here. So you can see all users here, which basically is showing you every single user on the site. And then you can go in and you can add comparisons. So these can be lots of different things. So you can do comparisons between different ages of people, genders, different towns and cities. But if you wanted to look at a particular traffic source, you wanted to compare organic and direct, or organic and paid, or something like that, what you would use is the default channel group. So which one to use depends on which report you're in. So if you're looking at users, you'd want to go for first user. If you're looking at sessions, which should be the traffic acquisition bit, you probably want to go for the session. So we're in user, so I'll use that. And so set to exactly match. And then luckily, this is one of the good bits about GA4 is it actually gives you the list of things you can use. Whereas in Universal Analytics, you had to type it in manually and you might get it a little bit wrong. So I can add, say, organic search as a condition here, which will, so what we're seeing here is organic search compared to all users. And let's say we wanted to add in a different one like direct. So again, we'd default channel, first user, exactly matches, and then let's go for direct. So I think that'd be the second biggest one. And you can see them side by side here. And say we want to get rid of all users, then we can just see organic and direct next to each other, and we can actually see the numbers down here.
Brilliant. I think that's an easy sort of step-by-step guide for people to do by themselves so they can sort of measure the other things. Just whilst we're on all users and traffic and things, how would somebody stop traffic, or is it possible for them to stop, certain IP addresses being filtered out of this report? I know that's something that you had set up for people on Universal Analytics beforehand.
Yeah, you can do that in the admin section. So you have to go through two it's been about a month since I did this, so apologies if I'm a little bit rusty. So it tends to look like this is the right place to do it, but there is actually there's a different section you have to do before you apply the filter. And if I remember correctly, that's in the data stream section. Sorry, just getting things in my way here. I think it's in configure tag settings. And then the option is actually hidden away, so you have to click show more. And then define internal traffic. And so, as you can see here, we've filtered out our own IP address. So you can see here, conscious filter. So you can just add a filter. For example, let's say you have an office in Leeds or something. So you can have Leeds office, and then select IP address equals, and then just type your IP address in here. You could do this with home IP addresses as well if you want. If you have a lot of staff working from home, though those can be updated quite often. And if you want to find out what your IP address is where you are, it's really easy. You just Google what is my IP, and Google will helpfully provide that to you. So you just copy that.
From when you did things sort of a month ago and maybe slightly further, like 6 weeks ago, things are still changing. So do you think Google Analytics 4 is still updating and changing and getting better?
Yeah, it's still changing. They're adding stuff to it. Annoyingly, they're moving things around a lot. Options like these. So in a few weeks, maybe this will move to a different section. Hopefully not. But yeah, they are changing things all the time, and they probably have a lot more resources going into it now that they've got rid of Universal Analytics as well. So hopefully things will get better quickly. That's my hope.
So it sounds like you're going to be doing another one of these in a couple of months.
Maybe. And so there is an additional step to this. So once you've set up that IP address, you save that, and then you should see the rule you've added here. It would say traffic type internal, because that's classed as internal traffic. And then what you do is you go back to the main admin section, and then you go into the data filters bit, click internal traffic, and you switch that from testing to active, which I can see that somebody has not done on our own website. So I'm turning that on now.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Yeah, that's how you set up.
Brilliant. Okay, so our next question is, how can you personalize your dashboard to include / consolidate data for marketing KPI reporting?
Okay, so what sort of data are we talking here? So kind of data you have on other systems?
Well,
so
I don't have any more
like
detail on the
question system or something.
I wonder if you could talk us through both.
So there isn't really an easy way of getting external data from, say, a practice management system or a CRM system or something like that into Google Analytics 4. What I'd recommend for that is using Looker Studio, because that can pull in data from a whole bunch of different sources. Like, if I just create a blank report a second. So you can see here there are loads and loads of different sources that Looker Studio can import from. 841 partner connectors. So you can have a look in here, and there are quite a lot of CRMs that actually have connectors built already. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. So you can just type one in. Let's say use, I don't know, something like Zapier. I imagine there's some kind of connector for this. No, maybe not. But yeah, there are so many different, MailChimp. So you can, if you use MailChimp in your marketing, you can connect that straight to Looker Studio and probably use that to get data on, to produce a nice dashboard on how many emails you've sent and their open rates and things like that. But the easiest thing, I think, if you can get any of your data into Excel, you can just copy it into a Google Sheet, and then you can use that data in Looker Studio. But that's what we do with some of our monthly reports. We get some data from our clients on how many conversions they've had, how many matters they've opened, things like that. Put that into a Google Sheet, and then you can get a nice graph in Looker Studio, which kind of shows you, say, the number of conversions compared to the number of matters, and then you can work out the conversion rate from website visits into say inquiry form fills, and then the rate from inquiry form fills into the number of matters. So there's some. I'd say that Google Sheets is probably the easiest way to do it for most people, because you can export data from almost, if you can export it as a CSV or an Excel, you can get into Google Sheets.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answers their question. I don't think they're on the call, so if they do have any further questions, they can get in touch with us via email, and we'll see if we can help a little bit further with that. So our next question is, what is an audience and how do I set one up?
So an audience, I'd say the best way to describe it is kind of a subset of your visitors that you can define. So it might be, just people coming from organic search is an example of an audience, or it might be people who visited from a certain location, or people who spent over 30 seconds on your website. That's an audience. So it's a group of people defined by a particular characteristic. And you can set up, Google contains some already. What you saw when I was looking at doing the comparisons earlier, there are some built-in audiences based on some criteria Google's already set up. But you can define your own audiences in the admin section here. So the way you would set up your own audience is you just click on New Audience. And so there are some reference ones here. Some of them might be relevant to you, some of them might not. But what you can do is you can create a custom audience. It's where it gets a little bit more complicated. So you need to add conditions to it. So we'll just call it test audience. And you've got a whole bunch of different options here. So let's say we're only interested in users from Bristol and London. So we can add London here. Probably won't. Yeah. And then we can add, or we can use or. Use the options that it gives us. So what this will do, this will create a audience of people who are either in London or Bristol. Then we can save that. And if it works properly, we should be able to use it as a comparison in the reports. Yeah, so in the audience name, you can set that to London or Bristol. And then if we apply that, I'm hoping this works. Okay, that didn't work. There's probably an issue with the rule that I set up there, but that's effectively how you do it. And you can use lots of different things for that. Like we could have people who only spent more than 30 seconds on the site, or you could set you could have an audience who are male, audience who are female. We could have audiences in different age ranges if Google's recording that data. So there are lots of ways you can set up.
Brilliant. So we've only got one remaining question, which is, are there any alternatives to Google Analytics 4? So before we move on to that, is there anything else you think it would be useful to cover whilst we're still in Google Analytics? Or do you think that's everything ticked off? Or is there any other questions that have popped up for our attendees that they want to put in the chat or come off mute and ask? I've not got anything in the chat, Jamie. So is there anything else you want to cover?
So should we just move on to the final question?
Yep. So
that there are other alternatives to Google Analytics 4, and some of them are a lot more simple to use. I know there are quite a lot of people who install GA4 on their website and just thought, I don't want anything to do with this, and just move to some more simple or different platforms. One of the most common ones is Matomo. So we haven't used this much. We're going to be testing it probably sometime this year. So Matomo has been around for quite a long time. It's used by some quite big companies. It's used by the UK government. As you can see here, it's used by NASA, the European Commission. So it has quite a lot of large organizations using it. So this isn't just kind of like some thing developed by one guy in his basement or anything like that. So this is, if you wanted to use an alternative to GA4, this would be one of the main ones that I'd recommend using. It works more similarly to Universal Analytics than it does Google Analytics 4. So that does have some benefits with it being easier to use. And I believe you can actually import your old Universal Analytics data into it. One of the main issues is that it doesn't integrate as nicely with Google's own products. So one of the main reasons to stick with using GA4 is if you use Google Ads, the data that's in GA4 and Google Ads feed into each other, and Google can and it can kind of like automate targeting specific keywords and audiences using the data from Google Analytics 4, whereas Matomo Analytics and Google Ads don't integrate together as nicely. So if you do want to use Google Ads on your website, it is probably best to at least, I mean, you can use multiple pieces of analytics software on your website, but it is still a good idea to have GA4 installed. For people who want even more simple stuff, there are other ones like Simple Analytics, that they just have very, very basic data. If you just want to track how many people came to my website, where they came from, there's lots of different alternatives that will do the basic stuff. Though we'd still, for businesses which for businesses that get a lot of their traffic from Google and or use Google Ads, I think it's still best to have Google Analytics 4 at least installed on your website and tracking, even if you want to still use one of the alternatives.
Thank you. And it sounds as though you're going to be trialing Matomo, and then you can write a lovely blog post once you've had a go and tell people how it is.
Yeah, on our own website first.
Okay, yeah, so that is all of the questions that we were asked beforehand. I feel like you've gone into a lot of detail and it's been quite complex. So are there any sort of final top tips you'd give people if they're a beginner maybe starting out on Google Analytics 4? What should they be looking at first? Is there anything they can ignore? What would be your top tip and piece of advice?
The main thing is just don't be afraid to have a play around with the reports. I mean, you're not gonna I know it can be quite overwhelming when you first go into GA4, but the thing to remember is you're not going to break anything unless you start messing around in the admin section. If you make some changes to reports that are wrong, they can always be reverted. Like the default reports can just be, if you break something, just let us know. We can put the default reports back on. So just don't be afraid to have a play with it. The main reports that I use on a day-to-day basis myself are user acquisition, traffic acquisition, conversions, pages and screens, and landing page. Those are the ones that will give you most of the information you need on a day-to-day basis. So I'd recommend spending some time with those reports and just have a play with them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jamie. And thank you for hosting this session. Hopefully people have found it interesting and also helpful, and they understand how to use Google Analytics 4 a bit better now. Perfectly on time as well, even though we had to start a little bit late, which is great. Our next session is on social media in 2023, from AI to X and your law firm's next steps. I'll send the link to register for that session in the follow-up email. So if you do want to come to that session, or someone in your firm would find that useful, please feel free to send the link on to them. I'm going to stop the recording.